All right, you guys are going to get 3 lessons in one. So if you're watching this on any one of the days from either Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday's notes, it's going to be all 3 lessons together. So let me draw a line here that separates it. This is going to be super fast review of how to simplify radicals because I don't think this is very difficult. Simplifying radicals. Well, a radical is the symbol. That's a radical. Just like it's the name of the sign, just like this is a plus sign, which means to add. A radical is a symbol name that means to take the square root. Well, what's the square root of 25? It's 5. What's the square root of 81? It's 9, etc. Those are easy because they're perfect squares. But what's the square root of 10? It's not a perfect square. So 9 is a perfect square. The square root of 9, which is easy, is 3. Isn't the square root of 10 just a little bit more than the square root of 9? So it must be a decimal, which it is. It'd be like 3.1 if I punched that into a calculator, 3.1 something. It would never terminate, never repeat. It's called an irrational number. Well, what about 12? 12 is not a perfect square either. It too would be an irrational number. As a matter of fact, we don't know the next exact square root until we get to the next perfect square, which I hope you know the next perfect square after 9 would be 16. So we got to have a way of dealing with these numbers. So how would I simplify the square root of 12 if I don't want to use an estimate? If I don't want to punch it into a calculator and get an answer, I want to just simplify it. We have a method, and it's called looking for perfect square factors. So think of 2 numbers that you can multiply to 12, called factors. And if any of them are perfect squares, we're going to be able to simplify this radical. So the factors I hope you're thinking of are 6 and 2 or 4 and 3. Well, of the ones I just listed, 6 and 2, 4 and 3, isn't 4 a perfect square? And the way you simplify this is very simple. Which one of these is a perfect square? 4 is a perfect square. So you take the square root of 4 and it will come out of the radical sign. So the square root of 4 is 2. Now, 3 is not a perfect square. It's just 3. So you leave that under the radical. So now if I was to punch that into the calculator, the square root of 12, I would get an answer that would be the same as the 2 times the square root of 3. And let me show you that. If I was to take the square root of 12, I get this long answer. This just means 2 times the square root of 3. So if I said 2 times the square root of 3, notice I get the same exact answer. And that's simplifying radicals. Let me do one more example for you. What if this was example 1. What if I gave you a number that had a lot bigger factors? So for example, first of all, let me put a number in front of the radical. Negative 3 radical, let's say 90. Well, 90 is not a perfect square. And this negative 3 in front of the radical just means negative 3 times the radical. Think of a radical as kind of like a variable. When you have a number next to a variable, it just means multiply. And that's all that means, is negative 3 times whatever the square root of 90 is. All right. Well, let's first take our calculator and do it, which you're not going to be using or needing, actually. Negative 3 times the square root of 90. But before we do that, let's estimate it. What's the square root of 90? Well, isn't it somewhere between 81, which has a square root of 9, and 100, which has a square root of 10? So if this number is between 9 and 10, let's say 9.5, what's negative 3 times 9.5, or what's negative 3 times 10? Somewhere around negative 28, I'm going to guess. Let's see what happens. Well, pretty good guess. Negative 28.46. But that's not how we're going to do it. What we're going to do is we're going to hope that we find a perfect square factor of 90. Well, you could think 90 is divisible by 10, which it is. It's 9 times 10. Now, how does this help me? Well, 9 is a perfect square. Take the square root of that number and bring it out of the radical. But you're already multiplying by this negative 3, so you're going to multiply the square root that you took by that number. So the square root of 9 is 3 times this number that's already out there. So let me move it up here. It's negative 3 times the 3, which is the square root of the number you took, radical 10. Sorry about that. The lights went out and I said a couple of inappropriate words. Now that you didn't hear those, let's multiply those together. You get negative 9 the square root times the square root of 10. Well, let's see if I did it right. Negative 9 times the square root of 10. Well, they are the exact same answer, so it must be right. Okay, practice those.